Use a calculator to perform the indicated operations. Round the result to 2 decimal places. So as we look at these problems to work, notice that they're telling us to use a calculator, and we can see how the calculator is going to be really helpful because we've got lots of decimal numbers running around here. Having to work all these operations by hand would be pretty tough. So we could do it, but it would just take a lot of time. So we're grateful for the tool that we get to use, the calculator here. Now we have to be really careful when we're doing some of these kinds of problems on our calculator. We'll point out some of the things we have to be attentive to. Now this first problem isn't too bad. Let's go ahead and pull up our calculator. And so we can see that we're going to have 3.72, and from that we're going to subtract a quotient. And we're going to subtract the 5.7 squared divided by 6.39. And so in a problem like this, remember when we put it into our calculator, we don't get to use the stacked fractions like this. We would need to enter in something like 3.72 minus 5.7 squared divided by 6.39. And we want to make sure that order of operations don't get lost when we enter something into our calculator. Remember that this division bar also works as a grouping mechanism. Okay, it groups everything in the numerator together, it groups everything in the denominator together, and it groups, in fact, the whole fraction together. So we can see that none of that gets lost in this particular problem, but if I wanted to be really safe, I could go ahead and put this part into parentheses. Now the division is going to make sure that everything here is going to happen before the subtraction because my calculator does no order of operations. So let me just pull this up and let's work this one through. So 3.72, from that we're going to subtract, and I said I'm going to use parentheses here, 5.7, and we're going to square that, and that's going to be divided by 6.39. Because I opened the parentheses, I want to be sure that I close the parentheses, and when I enter that in, I get negative 1.364507, and it goes on and on and on, but gratefully they told me to round to do 2 decimal places. And so let's go ahead, do that rounding. We're going to go 3 decimal places out to see how I should round. Because that 3rd decimal place is a 4, my final answer is going to be negative 1.36. Negative 1.36. Now the second problem, we have to be very careful. We want to be sure our numerator gets held together and our denominator gets held together, because we're not going to be able to use this fraction bar to hold those things together in groups. So we're going to need on our calculator to use parentheses, even though the original problem doesn't use those. So let's clear out our last problem. So in parentheses for our numerator, we're going to do 3.25, and we're going to add to that 63.4. Just shift my calculator a bit here. Now we're going to close off the numerator, and then we're going to divide by, and now we're going to enter in that denominator again in parentheses. So we have 41. And from that we're going to subtract, then inside parentheses, negative 4.5. We're going to close those parentheses. That's being multiplied to 7.92. And now's a good time to go up and take a look. So here we have this little set here. Let's see if I can highlight that. Not very well. We've got one set of inner parentheses here that have been opened and closed. This parenthesis here, though, hasn't been closed off yet, so we want to be sure that we close off that denominator, that big denominator parenthesis. And when we do that and press enter, we should end up with our correct answer. And again, we're going to be rounding to 2 decimal places. So notice that 3rd decimal point at this point is a 9. That's going to be enough to bump the 6 up to a 7. So my final answer will be 0.87. Again, that's a rounded answer. So 0.87. And because these are rounded, using the little approximate signs is a good habit to get into, so we know rounding has happened.